Hi, I'm James Dean Vogel of the BioProcess Institute, and welcome to our first episode of Between Two Ferrules. This series is designed to highlight the people, the products, the trends that are important to the bioprocessing industry right now, here today. Our guest today is Paul Priebe, Vice President of Business Development and New Markets for Qosina. Before joining Qosina, Paul earned a degree in mechanical engineering and has spent his career in technical sales and marketing positions, including 17 years at Sartorius Sateen. So let's have a discussion today with Paul Priebe. Welcome, Paul.
Hi, Jim. Thanks for having me.
Well, this is the first one of our Between Two Ferrules, and we're really happy that you're here to kind of kick this off. We're excited to hear about some of the things you've been doing, as well as what Qosina's up to. And so that's really important for us.
Great.
So you've had about 20 years experience in process filtration and single use. Can you give us some thoughts about this past year with COVID-19 and what's going on, and what do you think some of the impacts are to the single use community and what's going on in the market?
Yeah, sure. I think the single use industry, Jim, has to make sure that they first talk about the impact single use has had on COVID, right? Because I think there's a lot of complaining going on right now that potentially because of supply chain interruptions, et cetera, long lead times,
yep,
that there's a negative impact on single use technology on the COVID response. But there's no possibility whatsoever that vaccines could have been developed in 9 months without single-use technology.
Absolutely.
So we have to start with, the fact that single-use solved a lot of problems, but of course the spike in demand associated with COVID and the underlying demand of non-COVID therapies being brought to market, when you go to maybe doubling the demand on a technology that was on forecast, no industry can respond quickly to that. So for me, the long-lasting impact should be, I hope, some greater understanding of the supply chain, where the weaknesses are, and develop a toolkit of solutions for how to pivot when there are interruptions in the supply chain. Of course, in a regulated industry, change is always hard. So second sourcing or changing to a different component because of a shortage, or a different material because of a shortage, is by nature very difficult. And we need tools and a playbook to be able to do that.
Well, it's funny, when we started with helping some folks with single use, some of them started out initially of having those second sources, right? And they spent a lot of resources qualifying 2 or more suppliers, only to realize that they never leveraged the second one and spent a lot of time and money on that. Obviously now we learned through this event that may not be the thing to do all the time, but there may be certain instances where you're going to have to.
Well, I like to say that second sourcing is one tool in the bag. You really have to understand the supply chain much more deeply to ensure that at some point you don't end up at the same choke point.
Correct.
You may have 2 sources, and then at the end you've got one component that's the weak link in your supply chain. I mean, the interruptions in today's market, and it's not just the single-use market, right? Consumer behaviors have changed, demands on different plastics and things like that have changed. So what we're hearing about shortages like on polycarbonate or nylon or raw base resins shortages. So if you think that dual sourcing at the N-1 supplier level is going to solve your supply chain issues, you're mistaken. You need a much more comprehensive understanding of the supply chain to de-risk it, or a toolkit to pivot and be able to declare comparability and work under deviation or some other combination of that to be able to survive during times of crisis.
And I think that toolkit, or that knowledge base of really understanding who are your suppliers, what are your products and your components, or if you're an end user, what are the components that you're using and how you're using them is key.
Exactly.
And that's something that we try to do here at BPI to do that. I'm sure Qosina must be working on that. Can you tell us a little bit about your role at Qosina and then how you're looking to expand the business into new markets?
Sure. So when I was looking to make a change in my career, I had been in single use at Sartorius for something around 15 years, and I understood this single use marketplace as developing some unmet needs, and there are a proliferation of new suppliers in the marketplace, and each of these suppliers has the exact same issues eventually. They all want to join the market because it's an exciting, fast-growing market. And typically a fast, flexible, agile model is the way to win business when you're a new customer. You serve your local customer well, and you win the business. But fast and flexible doesn't scale well. Fast, flexible, agile eventually means you have a warehouse full of components because you bought the minimum order quantity you needed from your supplier in order to serve the quantity for your customer. Well, you used 100 out of 500 pieces for a phase 1 trial. Those other 400 sit on the shelf till phase 2 or 3. And if that product never makes it to phase 2, then they sit there forever until they're discarded. So Qosina, who's been serving the medical device industry for more than 40 years, has always served a regulated businesses, people building medical devices. And what we do is small quantity distribution for those components to the med device manufacturers. Mm-hmm. So our control over the supply chain, the quality oversight of our suppliers, and all of that really felt like a perfect fit for the single-use industry.
Seems good, yeah.
And so my primary role since joining Qosina, the new market, is the expansion and launch of a complete portfolio for the single-use bioprocessing.
Okay, because I know in our experience we've helped a lot of integrators utilize Qosina for the smaller parts.
Exactly.
You know, historically those that have been in medical device.
Right. Here I have a small sample bag, and we do a lot of small quantity sampling. But Qosina has always been known for small lure lock fittings. So this a lure to barb adapter, so you can adapt from a lure to a flexible tubing like silicone or TPE. And we've been known for those swabbable lures, pinch clamps, things like that for years, serving, in fact, most of the single-use integrators that exist in the world. But now we've created a one-stop shop where essentially all of the basics needed to create a single-use system are available from Qosina. One of our widest categories, so I personally did this over the past year. We curated in really this comprehensive portfolio, and barbed tube-to-tube connectors. We have well more than 500 different barb connectors, and we'll talk. I think we're going to talk. I know, Jim, we're going to talk about standardization in a little while, I'm sure.
Yep.
So we can talk about barbs and why we need 500 when we get to standardization.
Absolutely, absolutely. But how big of a scale do you go to now? I mean, obviously this here is 1/8 inch or whatever tubing, 1/8 inch ID. What are some of the larger sizes you can go up to now?
So yeah, this is, I think, I think that's 1/8 inch. Typically hose barbs up to 1 inch.
Okay.
So 1 inch ID tubing would be adapted. So everything in that range. But essentially anything that's commercially available.
So how does that work for an integrator if they signed up with you? Do you have some type of a quality system that they plug into, or what would happen with that?
Well, so we run an ISO 1345 9001 quality management system. Mm-hmm. So because we serve med device, we have 1345, and of course 9001 is just good to have.
All industry, yeah.
Exactly. So our quality unit does provide oversight of our suppliers, and then all of our documentation, of course, is controlled within the controlled document system that we need to maintain because of the 1345. So when we establish a specification, then that's subject to change control, and so that our customers know and or can trust that we're under control of that item. And so we have, change notification, change control, and segregated inventory, last time buy options, and we really do need, of course, medical devices had this need for years.
Sure.
And
controlling the
single
supply
use.
chain like we started the conversation.
Exactly. So all of that is, part of the foundation of how we serve the regulated industries, and so we bring that benefit to single use as well.
So if I buy the product, let's say I bought this product right here, I would have the quality package that I could either log into your database and get its pedigree or whatever would go through your system for that?
Exactly. So if you're registered on our website, you can download all the product documentation for these products directly from our website. So 2D and 3D drawings or CAD models. So the step files you can serve down directly. Product information or product specification summary. So that's a nice sheet to start with because while it doesn't have the backup documentation associated with it, it gives you all the answers. You don't have to read a 50-page document to extract, it's USP Class 6 and we have REACH and RoHS certification on these things. A variety of different things, the gamma compatibility, the shelf life, things of that nature,
Very
all
good.
summarized on one document.
Wow, pretty handy. Now, early on in the conversation, we talked about an example of, let's say, the supply chain was interrupted. So let's say you have a piece, I'm using this piece, and for whatever reason I can't have this now, or it's been discontinued or something. How do you help me deal with that problem?
Right, so first thing is function or shape, right? In this case, I need a female lure by 1/8 inch barb. So we have to search for function first, and then the best thing would be if I can find one made by someone else molded from the same resin. So we have transparency to the resins on a very high proportion of our products, and so that we can readily switch from one to the other. And of course it'll be purchased under a different part number, but we can provide a documentation package that allows you to say it's like for like. You can leverage your existing validation. Maybe you have to, of course, do a risk assessment and understand, are there any risks to choosing the new piece? If it's an ISO lure connector and the barb is the same dimension, I think you could probably go forward. If the barb is slightly different, because there are no standards for barbs, you may want to do an engagement qualification, quick qualification to show comparability to cover the risk of a leak there. But that would be the approach that I would suggest. Yeah.
Very nice, very nice. Well, that would definitely help. I could see that helping some other people. How about the more detailed information? We work with a fair amount of end users and they'd like the extractables information and so on. So let's say we needed that for a component. How do you help them with that?
So with extractables documentation, it is on a supplier by supplier basis. It really depends upon who the end supplier is and what their policies and procedures are. In some cases, of course, the BPOG extractables database or clearinghouse is one good mechanism that can allow them to access that. Other suppliers are willing to give us their extractables information that we can share with qualified end users. So it is a little bit case by case.
Okay. You've been a longtime member of BPSA and on the board there, and also a member of the other associations, PDA, ASME, BPE, ASTM, E55, and as we call them, the Alphabet Soup.
Yeah.
Who's in charge? How do we decide what to do, and how do we get things to happen, or know what to follow?
Well, it's everyone's in charge and no one's in charge until it's either law or, let's say, one of the USP, of course, becomes part of law. And then everything else simply needs to show its value in use, and then they become in charge. So, it's, as Jim, you and I know each other from the Alphabet Soup for, I don't know, 10 or 15 years.
Yep.
And, I think we've banged our hands on the table enough. There's always this they.
Yep. They can't let us do it.
or there's people in the audience that say they ought to write something, and I think we've probably said the exact same thing. That there is no they. They is you, or they is us, and it really is incumbent upon the industry to recognize the problems that exist, define the right solution, figure out which member of the alphabet soup is the best place to progress that topic, and then bring the experts together to write something that solves the issue. And I reacted on LinkedIn a few weeks ago to a survey that Aspenbrook put out a survey asking about the implementation of single use and should there be a CFR or some regulation. And a pretty high proportion of folks said, yes, we need a law to tell us what to do.
Use it. Right.
Now, I think, we're from the government and we're here to help is sort of a joke, that's been played
since
over
the
years,
80s. Yep.
Right? And so I would hesitate to invite the law to regulate our business.
Mm-hmm.
And so when there are unmet needs, when there are gaps in understanding or gaps in particularly if you need to spend a lot of time defending your rationale about how you qualified something or how you implemented something, that for me screams out there's an opportunity for a consensus organization to standardize that.
Sure.
So that it's a built-in inefficiency. If the regulators are challenging your rationale on how you did something, perhaps following a standard approach can drive efficiency and take that dialogue out. And there's also a lot of nervousness. So some companies, let's say end user companies, because of the lack of standardized approaches to doing things, they tend to do things in a way that has no risk of a regulatory bump in the road.
Well, at least it's perceived that it will have less risk and less, let's say, pointing out the issue or be novel or something new.
Exactly. And so I think that sometimes we see things being overdone, and if we get back to that discussion on change control and switching from one item to another, if you paint yourself into a corner because you don't know how to qualify something, so let's say you overqualify it.
Yep.
The ability to move to another item, another material of contact, is restricted by that. So, at the end of the day, science and risk-based approach needs to be the foundation of everything. And so the more risk there is, the more data you need to generate
Absolutely.
to show that there is no risk.
Or that you're handling it in an appropriate fashion. You can never have zero risk, but
Exactly.
how you handle that and what you do. So single use has been a great opportunity to close the system.
Right. Well, there's an old idea that's new again. So I'm old enough in this industry to remember when people built their own single-use systems
Oh,
and
yeah.
autoclaved them.
Yep.
Well, that's in some way making a comeback. If you are worried about the dual sourcing, you can make one of your sources your own assembly operation for in-house autoclaving. And so there's, of course, a little bit more qualification to be done because of two different sterilization methods. But it's an option that could work. So if an end user company, a biopharmaceutical manufacturer, needs components for single-use systems to build either during PD work, non-clinical stuff,
Or
non-GMP,
upstream in the process where you're doing transfers or something like that
yeah,
prior to
non-sterile
filtration.
stuff. Exactly, they can buy everything they need from Qosina.
Okay, very good. To build on this a little bit, I think what we've seen in our training sessions and so on is educating folks back to the FDA. Most of the rules, if you really look at it, are there in 211, in 210, and so on. But 820 has as a slightly different playbook.
Right.
And we're taking some things from there. And one thing that some folks don't know is that the consensus standards are actually recognized by the med device folks in CDRH.
Yes.
And there's actually a website on FDA.gov that shows their consent or their consensus standards to reference.
10993 has a guidance document,
Yep.
how to use it, how to apply it, and if you look at the table in 10993-1, it's quite clear cut.
Yep,
You look at the risk of the application, it tells you which chapters to do.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Some of the things we've been talking about in some of our training and with our clients is what are the trends and how are they evolving? So, we talked about sterility and some of the things there. ISO 11137 is pretty clear coming over from med device. But more recently, people are looking at ways to apply particulate and endotoxin claims. And then how does that apply to frequency of testing and then for critical applications such as cell and gene therapies and what to do there? What do you think are some of the trends that we can think of today or maybe comment on those to start with?
Well, I would love for a trend to be for people to have a deeper understanding of what these claims mean and what they don't mean. I don't think it is a trend, but maybe we can contribute to that today.
Yeah, well, and that does help. For sure.
Particulate's a perfect example. So 788, a claim on 788 for a single-use system is an attempt to leverage an existing particulate
Yep.
analysis toward a dry system. Now, of course, 788 was written for drug product.
Yep, in the vial.
Or in a bag in the case of large volume parenterals, right? So there's two different
Levels.
criteria. So most companies would apply the stricter criteria, which is the LVP spec, which has the two different particle sizes and the maximum quantity. But that's written on a per milliliter basis.
Mm-hmm.
So of course a dry system, that doesn't make sense. What do you do with a 100-liter bag? You rinse it with 100 liters and then do it. You rinse it with 1 liter and do it. And I think, so understanding, and this actually creates a difficulty because once the end user recognizes that particulates are important to them, we still don't really have the vocabulary to have a proper dialogue between supplier and end user on setting requirements and meaningfully addressing them.
Mm-hmm.
So, that there's so much work to be done there. And I know the BPSA, and certainly you authored or led the authorship of the first BPSA paper.
And we
particulate.
revised it too.
No, it's a slow thing, and there's a lot of learning to be done, but it has to really be pulled from the end users because the suppliers won't solve this problem unless there's a demand for it.
Absolutely.
My real concern is, the risk of particulate contamination in bulk drug substance manufacturing. It's real. It's something to worry about. It could be viewed as a contaminant by the regulators. But it can be mitigated through the use of filtration and if the risk of a particulate contamination in cell culture could lead to agglomeration, but generally speaking, there's no risk to the patient. And so from a risk mitigation standpoint, you can handle particles in your bulk drug substance manufacturing process until you get to drug product manufacturing
And cell therapy.
Fill finish. Well, perfect, right? So now we talk about cell therapy, where there's not a single sterile filter. It's a aseptically run process, and you're dealing with T cells, which are many times larger than anything that you could use a sterilizing grade filter for. And so particulate mitigation is a whole nother topic in cell therapy. And of course, the patients that are being served by cell therapy are very sick. It's often the therapy of last resort until things change and there's enough where cell therapy becomes the AMA standard of care. Cell therapies are always going to be only served to the sickest patients that it is literally the last resort.
Are there any other trends that you would think of, or any trends that in our community or in single use that would be something that we should note? We publish our top 10 list of single-use trends, and so I don't know if there's anything that you would say we need to add there, or maybe move up or down the list. But these are things from other folks that we've talked to have been things to consider. Automation and big data, continuous processing, and as we said, cell and gene therapy and miniaturization are some of the things on there.
Well, I think what's fun, just pick up continuous processing. Continuous processing came to the discussion after single use was of course you would build it out of single use technology is the technology of choice if it serves the process needs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for continuous processing, generally smaller volumes, single-use technology is already an assumption that continuous processing will be built in single-use. So, I think more and more clinical products are coming, either just clinical material being made by continuous processing, and then a PD decision will be made before phase 2, whether to stay on a continuous platform or transition to a more traditional fed batch or something like that. I think the first thing in any discussion on integrity is what's the consequences of an integrity loss. And I think there's of course, you don't want to invite scrutiny that the process is out of a state of control. And if you have a leak that has really no consequence, if it's a buffer, it's a lost batch, it's detected, if you do an FMEA on it, it's a very minimal consequence to have a leak in a buffer bag, as long as it doesn't invite scrutiny that you are out of a state of control. So I think by and large, all the buffer bags used in our industry are not integrity tested. And then quality by design comes in, and training and handling all along the product life cycle. Most of the defects I saw in my years in single use were often caused by mishandling. And sometimes even just the use of a razor knife to slice open the box, and then you have a 6-inch long slit in your bag. Well, you don't need an integrity test protocol to prevent that defect.
Right. Absolutely. We've seen similar things with multi-use, because we can say, from our experience with diaphragm valves and gaskets, traditional hygienic clamp gaskets, that I can say of the failures that I've investigated, I can only count on one hand those that the device actually failed. All, tens of them have been, where they've been either installed improperly or the process had an upset which affected it in some way, which caused that to happen.
Yep.
Okay, you've published articles on subjects such as membrane filtration and selection, and sterile filtration, as well as disposable technologies. What do you think of the future? What are we going to look for regarding the future, and perhaps maybe some advice for some young people entering the industry?
I think when we think about single-use technology, we want to be sure that the mistakes made in the early days of single-use technology are not made by the incoming classes, these folks who are coming into the industry with only a few years experience and don't know about the documents that have been written before them, and use those and leverage those to avoid the mistakes of their predecessors.
Well, I think every industry has that, and to try to build on that, I think you can also see examples of the multi-use community coming into single use, but sometimes they bring the paradigm with them. And we mentioned before things like pressure holds and so on, and they try to marry that up and maybe aren't there. I know in our training we're actually retooling some of it, because we're realizing we're getting some of the younger operators coming in that have never worked with a multi-use system. So yeah, there might be some principles you want to share with them, but it's not the same type of learning for them if they never did it, and we'll cover maybe less time on steam sterilization or something like that, because it's really just something they need to know that's out there, but they'll probably never steam sterilize or autoclave something in their career.
Yeah, I mean, I think about training, and in a previous, I was involved in an external organizational activity where we were planning it was a PDA event on single-use technology, and there was a paper that at that time was old. So I think, I'm trying to remember when we did this. It was probably around 2010-ish, and I wanted this author from Bayer to present on the impact of training on failure rate.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a 6 or 7 year old paper, and I was challenged, why would you organize a
Training
talk,
on something that old
at a conference? It has to be new and different and exciting, but it was still really meaningful, because single-use technology, while Bayer was one of the pioneers of single-use technology in the cogenate process in Berkeley, they learned the hard way that they could actually, with a proper training program, reduce by a factor of 10 their failure rates. And so it was interesting. So I knew some people there, and we talked about the actual things that they did, and it was very much hands-on, and they showed how when you handle things in one way versus handling them in another, and then leak test it, you could see, oh, I created a leak because I
Yep.
grabbed the tubing and yanked on the tubing wall, or I did these different things. So I would love to dust that paper off again. Here it is now, another 10 years later, and get it out there to the industry that training of the operators, the people who are touching single-use technology every day, is potentially the most impactful thing they can do to create success.
Well, I think it's been proven in our industry with environmental monitoring. Let's use that for even gowning techniques. What you see is, as people become complacent, their environmental monitoring counts will go up, whether it's in the clean rooms at the suppliers or at the end users.
Sure.
And so the same thing goes for the single use, and we do in our navigating the world of single use, we do a lot of just that hands-on type training, where we'll use, everyone makes the connections with the aseptic connectors, they inflate a bag right in the class, and they get that experience. So it's invaluable to keep that going with the folks.
I think aseptic connectors are a perfect example, because people say, oh, you validated a technology. No. You validated a process of using a technology to perform the
Yep.
process of creating an aseptic connection. Whether it's a welder or an aseptic connector, the operators have to be trained in the performance of that, and then qualified with periodic refresher training.
Yep.
And of course, all of the things need to be built into the training, right? So it's different types of learners. You've got visual learners and auditory learners, and people who have to do it. You have to embrace all of those. So training's a whole topic you probably know times more than I about, but it's absolutely necessary.
It's a challenge, but I think the key from this discussion is that hands-on side and really getting that to build, and it's constant. It's constantly there.
But everyone's favorite corrective action is retraining.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
If you find yourself writing retraining more than once, maybe you ought to consider the effectiveness of training and building in effectiveness metrics, and also understand the frequency. The neat thing about the Bayer paper was they actually tracked failure rate, and they saw that training needed to be less than 6 months in frequency, because right around at the end of 6 months, they saw a spike in integrity failures, and they associated with it handling, and so I think they brought the training into a 4-month frequency, and then they rotated through different training techniques, but they were able to keep their rates very low.
And that's like I said, very similar with environmental monitoring. You see the same effects. One final thing on the future is how or what would we tell a young person, what would you tell a young person to get involved with the Alphabet Soup?
Well, I've stood in front of more than one audience, as you've seen me do during these presentations where the Alphabet Soup, or again, there's the they, and I personally, I found that volunteering for within the Alphabet Soup was personally and professionally rewarding. You get exposed to a lot of different people. You can build a network of folks that you can rely on, either for friendship or for their technical expertise to get you out of a jam when you have a question you don't know, but also even just work style. You may be working within one organization for a certain period of time and only be exposed to that culture, and you work with somebody in a volunteer organization who comes from a very different organization. You can learn different ways of work and even maybe be exposed to mentoring opportunities, either as a mentor once you've progressed, or take a mentor on from within the volunteer organization. So I would say vote early and often. Get involved. Get involved.
Yep.
It's a great thing.
Excellent. Excellent. So we talked early on about standards and hose barbs as an example. So, the standards, what we've seen is it really depends as to where you are in perspective. Are you a supplier? Are you an N-1 supplier? Are you an end user? And we kind of use the cartoon that's been out there about, the 8 blind people with an elephant, and one may touch the trunk and think it's a snake, another one may touch a leg and think it's a tree. So it's a little different to everybody and how they are. What's your view on standards and kind of how we can maybe help clarify some of that?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's multiple ways to slice this whole topic, and there's standards with a big S, and there's standards with a small s. So I think that's one good way to start. Standards with a big S would have run through an ANSI accredited standards writing body, and so they are by law required to be recognized by at least the FDA. And it certainly has a lot more provenance, because an ANSI accreditation means that there's a rigorous process of peer review and
Consensus building, right.
Exactly.
Yep.
Then there's standards with a small s, which probably should be more called like best practices or
guidelines,
guidelines, not guidance documents from the FDA. And those would be like, and I don't want to take anything away from these, because they can bring a lot of value, because they can become de facto standards.
Oh, yeah.
For instance, the BPOG extractables protocol is a good example. Once everyone is using it, essentially it's a standard, just like a consensus standard. It went through a different process of getting there, but it becomes best practice, and it can be readily defended against regulators. You don't have to rationalize that.
Right. So describe then your best victory sailing.
Well, my best victory sailing come when I'm not in charge on the boat and my son is driving the boat. So in the club that I frostbite in, we sail 2 different types of boats. One is double-handed with 2 people on board, and one is single-handed, just me. So my victories have all come when I'm crewing for my son, and he's quite a good sailor, and we tend to. A few years ago, we won the Long Island Championship, frostbiting championship. So we finished first out of 22 boats.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it was fun.
You must have been proud of them. That's
Yeah,
good.
well, I collect all the hardware and pretend that I actually matter on the boat, but he's doing everything.
Was your trophy a piece of ice, or what was that for that?
Well, it's typically barware,
Okay.
because frostbiting and the post-sailing festivities in the bar go hand in
To
hand.
thaw out, makes sense.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, I appreciate your time here today, and look forward to continuing this discussion maybe the next time you're in Rhode Island. And good luck with Qosina and the new adventure that you're going into.
Thanks for having me.